In this video we're going to be talking about my favorite Opel ever made, the Opel Kadett E. The Opel Kadett E, introduced in August 1984, marked the sixth and final generation of Opel's compact car family line, celebrated for its aerodynamic design and versatility, and it was named European Car of the Year of 1985. It was produced up until August 1991 and 1993 with various body styles and engine options, and was rebranded in multiple markets, including as the Vauxhall Astra Mark II in the UK. The Kadett E featured a sleek aerodynamic teardrop shape influenced by the 1981 Opel Tech 1 concept car. Its design included a distinctive front end, a calm tail, and a prominent seat pillar extraction vent. Up until 1989, the Kadett's grille was very big, something used a lot by cars in modern brands. However, it wasn't that common in the 1980s. And after 1989, the Kadett received a slight facelift, with a different front end and some other engine options. The car was available in a lot of body styles, basically being comparable to the amount of body styles available for the Kadett C, as Kadett D simply didn't have that much body styles. It was available as a 3-door hatchback, a 5-door hatchback, a 4-door limousine called the Belmont in UK, 3-door caravan or an estate, and a 5-door estate, as well as a 3-door panel van and a van with a higher roof called the Kadett Combo or Bedford Astra Max in the UK, and a 2-door convertible, introduced in 1987, built by Bertone, up until 1993. The car's dimensions varied slightly depending on the body style, but it generally offered a compact footprint suitable for urban and family use, with the same length of 4 meters for the hatchback and convertible, just like the Kadett D. But the limousine grew this time. It had the same length as the caravan of 4.2 meters, which the Kadett D limousine didn't have as it was based on the hatchback. All of these models were produced up until 1991, except for the Cabriolet, being produced and available up until 1993, made by Bertone. Inside, the Kadett E provided a functional and straightforward layout. The dashboard was designed for clarity with easily readable gauges and accessible controls, and higher trim levels offered additional features, such as power windows or upgraded upholstery, due to the big amount of limited edition models the car had. But there are also options for the exterior, such as fog lights, car-colored bumpers, for example on the GT, different rims, as they had a lot of different rims to choose from, and mostly all being available by different limited editions, which we'll talk about later. The cabin was spacious for its class, offering comfortable seating for 5 passengers and ample cargo space, especially in the estate, panel van and limousine version. And the Kadett E came with a range of petrol and diesel engines. A lot of the engines were already seen in the Kadett D, however were slightly improved to, for example, reach higher top speeds. The 1.0N S and the 1.2N, which were available in the Kadett D, were dropped, and the starting engine of the Kadett E was now the 1.2S. Notable with the engines was the increased focus on fuel injection, which slowly started becoming more important, starting with the Kadett C and D with the GTE models. And as said before, the starting engine was the 1.2S with 54 horsepower, 84 Nm, giving the car a decent acceleration from 0 to 100 of 17 seconds, comparable to the 1.2N in the Kadett D, giving a very decent top speed of 155 km an hour, and an average fuel consumption of 6.7 liters per 100 km. It was actually very decent. It was followed up by a normal petrol engine, this time being the 1.3N. And power output wise, this didn't change, as it had 60 horsepower and 94 Nm, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of 15 seconds and a top speed quite decent at 160 km an hour. Fuel consumption wise, it was also very decent, with only 6.9 liters per 100 km. Of this engine, you also had a super petrol variant with 75 horsepower and 101 Nm. giving the car a very good acceleration of 13 seconds from 0 to 100 and a top speed of 170 km an hour, while still having the same fuel consumption of 6.9 liters per 100 kilometers. And basically the 1.3 engines were the most chosen ones. Later in the Kadett line you also had the 1.3i, which was an injection engine, and this basically was introduced around the facelift of 1989. This also had 60 horsepower and 96 Newton meters, but being slower than the 1.3N, with a 0 to 100 time of 16.5 seconds instead of 15. Top speed wise it was the same, as it had a top speed of 160 km an hour, but fuel consumption wise it was actually worse at 7 liters per 100 kilometers. Since 1989 you also had the 1.4S, a very notorious and uncommon engine, but it had 75 horsepower, 108 Newton meters and a very decent 0 to 100 acceleration of 12.5 seconds and a top speed of 170 km an hour, being faster than the 1.3S, while still having an even better fuel consumption of only 6.7 liters per 100 kilometers. This engine also later on had a fuel injected engine variant with 60 horsepower yet again, 103 Newton meters instead of the 96 for the 1.3i, and a 0 to 100 time of 15 seconds, 1.5 seconds faster than the 1.3i, while still having the same top speed of 160 km an hour, but being better at fuel consumption at 6.7 liters per 100 kilometers. Another engine that was there from the start was the 1.6S, a super petrol version with a carburetor having a power output of either 90 horsepower up to 1988 or 80 horsepower since 1988. It had 126 Newton meters up to 1988 and 130 after 1988, and it actually became a bit slower after 1988, as up to 88 it had a 0 to 100 time of 11 seconds, while after 1988 it had a 0 to 100 time of 12.5 seconds. The top speed also decreased from 180 km an hour to 175 km an hour later, but the fuel consumption stayed an average of 7.4 liters per 100 kilometers. The decrease in power most likely was caused by the catalytic converters that became standard on these engines. The 1.6 also had a fuel-injected engine, as it had a power output of 75 horsepower, 124 Newton meters of torque, giving the car a decent 0 to 100 time of 13 seconds and a top speed of 170 km an hour. This engine had an average fuel consumption quite decent at 6.9 liters per 100 kilometers. An engine that was also later introduced was the 1.8S, which basically was relatable to the power output of the earlier 1.6S, as it had 84 horsepower, a bit less than the 1.6S had, but 143 Newton meters, giving the car a comparable 0 to 100 time of the pre-1988 1.6S, 11.5 seconds, having a top speed of 178 km an hour. Fuel consumption wise it was actually the worst of the normal engines with 7.6 liters per 100 kilometers. And this engine also received a fuel injected variant with 90 horsepower, 145 Newton meters of torque, a 0 to 100 time the same as the 1.8S with 11.5 seconds, but a higher top speed of 180 km an hour, while also being better at fuel consumption with 7.4 liters per 100 kilometers. This basically was the most powerful engine most of the normal Kadetts were able to receive in an engine, as the upfollowing engine was the 1.8 GSI, used in specifically GSI models, as this engine had a power output of 115 horsepower, 25 horsepower more than a normal engine, 151 Newton meters of torque, giving the car a, at that time, introduced in 1984, astonishing 0 to 100 time of only 9 seconds and a top speed of over 200 km an hour at 203 km an hour. Fuel consumption wise it was actually very decent for the power, as it had an average fuel consumption of 8 liters per 100 kilometers. And later, under the Frisco Special Edition for the Caravan or Limousine, you also had the 2-liter I, which basically for the Limousine and Caravan were the biggest engines available. As for the hatchback, the normal hatchback, the non-GSI hatchback, the other engines were the 1.8i with 90 horsepower. But for the Caravan and the Limousine, the biggest engine was the 2-liter injection with 116 horsepower, 170 Nm of torque and a 0 to 100 time of 9 seconds, pushing the car up to 195 km an hour, while having an average fuel consumption of 8.1 liters per 100 kilometers. This was for the Limousine and the Caravan the strongest, fastest and biggest engine, not being a GSI variant. Basically, the 1.8 liter GSI eventually got succeeded around 1987 with a 2 liter GSI, 8 valves with 129 horsepower. And this had a power output of 180 Nm of torque, giving the car a better 0 to 100 acceleration of 8.5 seconds instead of 9 seconds. Also increasing the top speed up to 205 km an hour, while having an average fuel consumption a bit better, rated at 7.7 liters per 100 kilometers instead of the 8 liters per 100 kilometers. And eventually you also had the 2.0 GSI 16 valves with 150 horsepower with catalytic converter or 156 horsepower without catalytic converter. In the first part I will be talking about the engine with catalytic converter, and in the second part without the catalytic converter. The catalytic converter had 150 horsepower and 196 Nm of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 acceleration of only 8 seconds and having a top speed of 217 km an hour, while having a very decent fuel consumption of only 7.5 liters. And the engine without catalytic converter had 156 horsepower, 203 Nm of torque, a 0 to 100 time of 7.7 seconds, but having the same top speed of 270 km an hour. Also having a comparable fuel consumption, but this time only being 7.4 liters per 100 kilometers. Besides this incredible list of petrol engines, the diesel engine collection also was expanded from only one engine in the Kadett D, the 1.6D, to 3 engines in total for the Kadett E. As I already spoiled it, it was started with the Kadett 1.6D, which had a power output of 54 horsepower and 96 Nm of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time, at that time already quite terrible, of 19.5 seconds, and having a top speed of 152 km an hour, while having an average fuel consumption of 6.5 liters per 100 kilometers. This engine already was increased a lot, as the top speed was much higher in Kadett E than it was in the Kadett D with the same engine. The 1.6 diesel engine eventually got succeeded in 1989 by the 1.7 diesel, which had 57 horsepower and 105 Nm of torque. It was also naturally aspirated and gave the car a slightly better 0 to 100 time of 18 seconds instead of 19.5. And it had a top speed 1 km an hour higher at 153 km an hour. Fuel consumption wise, it was much better, as it had an average fuel consumption of only 5.4 liters per 100 kilometers. And eventually, the most powerful diesel engine was a 1.5 liter turbo diesel made by Isuzu, also part of GM and owned by GM. This had a power output of 72 horsepower, 143 Nm of torque, giving the car a very decent comparable spec. And actually this engine was comparable to some petrol engines, as the 0 to 100 time was 13.5 seconds, giving the car a top speed of 170 km an hour, while still remaining diesel aspects, as the average fuel consumption was only 5.5 liters per 100 kilometers, making the engine actually quite comparable to the 1.3N or S. Transmission wise, the models except the GSI models were standard equipped with a 4-speed manual, with an optional 5-speed manual and a 3-speed automatic transmission available as well. The 5-speed manual decreased the fuel consumption by around 0.1 to 0.3 liters per 100 kilometers, while the 3-speed automatic worsened the fuel consumption by around 0.8 liters per 100 kilometers, while also worsening the 0 to 100 time by around 2.5 to 3 seconds. As said before, the Kadett E had a lot of special models, And in this part I'll be talking about basically every single model the Kadett E had. To start off with some special models, for example the Kadett GSI 16 valve Champion, which was equipped with a 2-liter 16 valve engine, and most of the time it was 150 horsepower or 156 horsepower, also having different rims, some different bumpers and really distinctive designs. You also had the Kadett Cabrio GSI made by Bertone and the Kadett E Rally, which was very successful in rally tournaments. And you also had some special editions, and at this time I'm going to talk about all of these. You had, for example, the Kadett Snow, which was completely white with bumpers in the color of the car, but also the more common but yet uncommon Club edition with special upholstery, rims, body colored mirrors and other interior equipment like a radio. And besides the normal GL, GLS or LS trims and even some uncommon GT trims, you also had other special editions of the Kadett E, which were actually a lot, like the Cup from 1986, which was a 5-door hatchback with black decorative stripes, body colored bumpers and mirrors and matte black B-pillars. Also the first generation of the Sprint from 1986 made by Irmscher, and which was a 3 or 5-door hatchback featuring red decorative stripes, tachometer, sports steering wheel and GT style bumpers. The Jubilee, which was also a hatchback and this time also being a limousine with silver decorative stripes. And as said before, the Club, available between 1987 and 1991, which was a 5-door caravan, a 3 or 5-door hatchback or a limousine, also with roof rails and body colored mirrors and yet much more. We also had California, which was a 3 or 5-door hatchback available in 1988 with yellow decorative stripes, a sunroof and a radio. And as said before, the Snow, available in polar white with red decorative stripes, seat heating and headlight cleaning systems. Also the Top, also available in 1988 in 3 or 5-door hatchbacks, and basically this had a rear spoiler. You also had the Tiffany, which was basically comparable to a top-of-the-line Senator, for example, the CD, which was actually just a hatchback or a limousine with golden decorative stripes, height-adjustable driver's seat and unique upholstery, and also some special rims. And you also had the Champion, as said before, which was basically a motorsport success with a GSI engine. Also a Live was introduced in 1990, just like the Champion, and this basically had some enhanced comfort features, as well as the Club Special in 1991, and this was exclusive to the 5-door caravan, featuring just some additional equipment. You also had the Frisco, as said before, and this basically also was available in the limousine, hatchback or caravan, and this had sport seats, a rear spoiler, ABS as standard, but also the option to, as said before, be fitted with a 2-liter with 116 horsepower. You also had the Fun yet again in 1991, and this also had just the Fun badging, special wheel covers and tinted windows optional, as well as the Beauty, and this basically was one of the last models the Opel was fitted with, and this was a hatchback or a limousine with Beauty badging, with velour upholstery and a sunroof. And there were many more I simply couldn't even find, and this was just a list of what I could find. But the Kadett E was produced in a lot of different versions. The Kadett E was also produced in several different countries, not only in Europe, including Germany, Belgium, Portugal, the UK, Spain, but even Brazil and South Africa, with a total production reaching approximately 3.78 million units, excluding Vauxhall and other rebranded models, making it the most successful Kadett ever made. So basically, therefore, it is safe to say that the Kadett E was made in multiple parts of the world, for example in the UK as the Vauxhall Astra Mark II. But it also was available in other parts of the world, simply being rebranded versions of the Kadett E. For example, as said before, in the UK the Vauxhall Astra Mark II, as well as the Vauxhall Belmont as the Saloon, and also the Bedford Astra Max, which was basically the caravan or panel van. But in Brazil you also had the Chevrolet Kadett for the hatchback and the Chevrolet Ipanema made as the caravan. You also had the Daewoo Le Mans, Racer, Cielo, Nexia, which basically were South Korean versions with production extending to even Uzbekistan and Romania, as well as in USA, the Pontiac Le Mans basically being a North American version, as well as the Passport Optima being a Canadian version. The Chevrolet Kadett in particular was very unique. In 1980s and the 1990s, the well-known Kadett E got a second life on the other side of the world in Brazil, and it appeared as the Chevrolet Kadett. This South American version was introduced in 1989, 5 years after the introduction in Europe by General Motors do Brasil, and was based on the same technical platform as the Opel, but featured slightly different styling tailored to local tastes. The Chevrolet Kadett stood out immediately with its sporty lines, slightly more modern trim and practical 3-door or 5-door hatchback, or even the station wagon. And not long after, a station wagon version was introduced called the Chevrolet Kadett Ipanema, or just the Ipanema, named after the famous beach in Rio de Janeiro. The Kadett was spacious, reliable and delivered decent performance for its time, making it especially popular among Brazilian families and young drivers. And engine options often included a 1.8 or a 2-liter petrol engine, sometimes with ethanol variants, giving the widespread use of alcohol fuel in Brazil. Comfort features like air conditioning, power steering and even digital dashboards became available in higher spec models. And unlike its European sibling, the Chevrolet Kadett remained in production up until 1998, after it was replaced by the Chevrolet Astra, which was, yet again, based on an Opel design. Being made in various different countries also led to having several different competitors, as the Kadett E competed with other compact cars of the era, for example the Volkswagen Golf II, or the Mark II called in the UK, also the Ford Escort having several generations, as well as the very unique Peugeot 309. And the Kadett E's successor was the Opel Astra F, introduced in 1991, the year most of the Bodystyles went out of production, except for the Cabriolet. The Kadett E remains notable for its aerodynamic design, versatility and the wide range of engines and variants, and rebranded models that extended its global presence. And as said before, between August 1984 and August 1991, a total of 3,779,289 units of the Kadett E were sold, excluding rebrands and the Vauxhall Astra Mark II. The Kadett E was most popular in Europe, though also doing quite well in the UK. For instance, in 1985, the Astra was the 6th best-selling car in the UK, with 76,553 units sold that year alone. And the Mark II Astra was well received, with Vauxhall achieving a 20% market share of the UK market in January 1985, outselling Austin Rover for the first time. And within months of its launch, Vauxhall had 40,000 Astra orders and was selling nearly 7,000 cars a month. However, in contrary to the UK, in the US and in Canada, the rebranded versions of the Kadett didn't sell that well, and I couldn't simply find any information about this. So basically, on top of the almost 3.8 million units sold, the Kadett was also sold a lot in the UK, and some units were also sold in the US, with also a lot of units sold in Brazil. Thanks for watching this video. To be able to upload more videos in the future, please consider becoming a member on my channel or sending in super thanks in this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Don't forget to check out this playlist with many interesting videos covering various parts of the automotive industry, and I will see you in the next video.